We're going to continue the sugya of Chassidus Chabad. Today we're going to focus on the third and fourth sikha of the booklet. Sikha Gimel is a sikha from Chelik of Dalet, Elul, and Sikha Dalet is a sikha from Chelik Lametes, Pashas Kisavi. So in last two sikhas, last year we focused on how Chassidus was in Zagala in general, and how Alter Rebbe was in Zagala Chassidus Chabad. And then we focused on also how the חידוש of the Alter Rebbe in Avedis Adam, that all the Keiches Adam could have a Chayis and Avedis Hashem mitzad their inyan. In this year, we're going to focus on the חידוש that Chassidus Chabad had in Achdus Hashem. That Chassidus Chabad brought out a new aspect in Achdus Hashem that wasn't revealed before. One of the main Chidushim of the Baal Shem Tov was that the Baal Shem Tov, through Chassidus, brought a Chayis and Avedis Hashem. Let me explain what is the concept of Chayis. The concept of Chayis means that the chayis and the thing that is being machaya aren't two separate things. In order to have a chayis in something, in order to have a life in something, the life that comes into the thing has to be connected to it in a way that you can't separate them. For example, the neshama is machaya the guf. In order for the neshama to be machaya the guf, it's not only that the neshama comes into the guf and revives the guf. The guf atzmi natzachaya, the guf itself becomes a living thing. There's no separation between the guf and the neshama. So in Torah mitzvahs, in order for Yid to have a chayis in Torah mitzvahs, a Yid can only have a chayis in Torah mitzvahs if he connects to Torah mitzvahs, that it's part of who he is. And that was the חידוש of Baal Shem Tov. The חידוש of Baal Shem Tov was that he's magal how a Yid and Torah mitzvahs are be'etzem one. A Yid and the Eibush are be'etzem one. And a Yid can relate to Torah mitzvahs as if he related to himself. How did Baal Shem Tov do that? Baal Shem Tov is magal Chassidus. Chassidus is primus HaTorah. And primus HaTorah is able to magal of the primus of a Yid Yid's neshama, that a Yid's neshama should become begili. And if a Yid's neshama becomes begili, if the premise of a Yid is begili, if a Yid's neshama is begili, that is his mitzvah, that's who he is. And therefore, Torah mitzvahs aren't a foreign concept, Torah mitzvahs is who he is. And therefore, he can have a chayis in them. And that was the Baal Shem Tov's חידוש, through Chassidus in general. And then we brought down how the Alter Rebbe was mechadish over that not only can a Yid have a chayis in Torah mitzvahs, a general chayis in Torah mitzvahs, but that every single Eiver and every single Keach of the person could be used in Avedis Hashem, starting from Chabad till it comes down into Midas and Tomaisa, which means that there's, besides having a general chayis, a general focus on serving the Eibishter, there's also a focus on every single Keach mitzad atzmi serving the Eibishter. So that was all mitzad the Yid's Avedis to the Eibishter. In these two sikhs, we're going to explain how Chassidus Chabad and Chassidus in general wasn't only machadish a new way of a Yid serving the Eibishter, but it was also machadish a new gilui nachas Hashem. It revealed a new connection the Eibishter has to the world that wasn't revealed before. So we'll start with the few term of the first of Sikha Gimel. The Rebbe explains. The Rebbe starts off that Elul is the birthday of Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, and the fact that the concept of a birthday. The Friedrich Rebbe emphasizes the concept of a birthday, dafka by the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, and we don't see that the concept of a birthday is emphasized so much. Must be that the teichen of a birthday, what a birthday is, has a connection to the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. And they were starting to explain what is the חידוש of a birthday. What is the difference? What happens when a person is born? In other words, what is the difference between an ubar and a person when he's born? The difference isn't in practical terms. Because Bepel, before he was moving, and now he's also moving. And before he was alive, and now he's also alive. Before he was eating, and now he's also eating. Before he was drinking, and now he's also drinking. So what's the difference? So the Gemara says in Sechas Nida is that regarding a ubar, is Eichel ma she'ima yechelas v'shes ma she'ima yeshes. Which means that even though he's eating, and he's drinking, and he's living, and he's moving in his mother's stomach, but that's all ma she'ima yeshes, ma she'ima eichel. Whatever she's eating, that's what he's eating. Which means that he's living, his whole tnuas and his whole life is independent of him. It's not his life. The life is coming from his mother. The nefesh is coming from his mother. And therefore, there's a separation between the nefesh and the guf. The guf is as if it's a separate entity. The guf is like a kli. And in the kli, he gets the chayis from his mother. When a person is born, he starts getting his own nefesh. He starts getting his own life. What is the definition of a person? The definition of a person is that he has his own chayis. He's not connected to something else which is giving him life. In other words, the definition of a living person is that his nefesh and his guf are one mitzvah. There's no two separate things between his life, his nefesh and his guf. His nefesh and his guf become one metzias, one entity. And that is a living person. And through that explains the connection of a birthday to the Baal Shem Tov. Before the time of the Baal Shem Tov, people wasn't mekayim Torah mitzvahs. Not only that, people were able to have a kachim Torah mitzvahs. People were able to have a chayz in Torah mitzvahs. But the chayz that people had in Torah mitzvahs and their connection to Torah mitzvahs was all in a way that there's a there's a mitzvah, there's an entity who's doing Torah mitzvahs. And so much so, even when you say Kehem Chayenu V'Erichamenu, that Torah mitzvahs becomes a person's life, Hogufi is saying that it becomes a person's life is emphasizing that there's a person over here. It becomes his life, but all in a way that it was given to him. Without Torah mitzvahs being given to him in a way that they become his life, his own entity would have no connection to Torah mitzvahs. In other words, you can't say that there's a full connection between him, the Adam Ha'evid, the Adam who's doing the mitzvah, and the mitzvah. Because at the end of the day, it's a separate entity. Comes the Baal Shem Tov, and Baal Shem Tov is Magala how a Yid could serve the Eibishter and be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs in a way that it's his own mitzvah, it's his own life. How did Baal Shem Tov do that? So the Rebbe explains that the Baal Shem Tov was Magala the inner Pshat and Enel Mavadeh. That the Pshat, when the Pasuk says Enel Mavadeh, that the Eibishter is the only Eibishter, doesn't only mean with pashtus that there's no other Eibishter besides the Eibishter. What it means is there's no other entity besides the Eibishter. That the whole world doesn't have a mitzias mifnei atzmei. There's no other chshivus, there's no other entity by the Eibishter. The Eibishter is the mitzias of everything. And the Rebbe explains that in Shaykh Lemuna how it works, al pi seichel, al pi Chabad. But that's the חידוש Baal Shem Tov. So what comes out is that there is no entity, there is no air. A Yid doing Torah mitzvahs, his life is Torah mitzvahs. The reason why his life is Torah mitzvahs is because there is no mitzvahs, there's no entity besides the Eibishter. So how is it Chayenu V'Erichamenu? How is it his life? It's his life because Elikus is everything. And if Elikus is everything, it's his life too. And therefore, his mitzvahs doesn't start b'chol. And the Rebbe explains this according to what it says in the Mishnah, Masechtas Kiddushin, that Ani le nivresi elo sham sheskeni. The Rebbe doesn't quote it over here, but a lot of times the Rebbe said that there's two gisois. One girsa is Ani nivresi le sham sheskeni. I was created to serve the Eibishter. Then there's another girsa, Ani le nivresi elo sham sheskeni. I wasn't created. The only reason why I was created was only to serve the Eibishter. What's the difference if you say Ani nivresi or Ani le nivresi? Both emphasizing that you were created to serve the Eibishter. What's the inner beard in both gisois? So Ani nivresi lo sham sheskeni means that a person was created to use his keches and use his mitzvahs to serve the Eibishter. So a person was created, Ani nivresi, a person was created with a head, with feet, with hands. The tachlis and the kavanah, why his head and hands was created was to serve the Eibishter. To use his head to learn Torah, and to use his hands to put on tefillin. That's why his hands and head were created. Ani le nivresi el sham sheskeni means that a person doesn't have a hand and a head in order to serve the Eibishter. The only true mitzias is the only true mitzias is Torah mitzvahs. And therefore, in order for mitzvahs to happen, in order for the mitzias of tefillin to happen, you need to have a hand. In order for the Eibishter's chachmah to be their head, you have to have a head in order to understand it. So the whole mitzias of a nivra, the whole mitzias ani le nivresi, the whole mitzvah of the nivra is only there in a prat, it's only there as a detail in Kiyum Torah mitzvahs. There is no separate entity of the person. And that's why we madish ani le nivresi. I wasn't created. As a separate mitzvah, the person doesn't have a right for zich. The only reason why he's here is el l'sham sheskeni. In order to have the concept of l'sham sheskeni, in order to have a concept that Torah mitzvah should be done in this world, you need to have a human being, you need to have a hand, you need to have a foot. So as a detail on that, you have a person who has a hand, and on the hand he can put on tefillin. In another place, that brings the dogma that for the Mishkan, the Eibishter created different things to serve the Mishkan. Dogma the Gemara brings that lenivra zav el beis hamikdash, the mitzvahs of gold was only created to serve the Eibishter. The Eibishter created the tachash animal for the skin of the Mishkan. But we see that even after Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Metzias of Zav, the Metzias of gold still exists. As opposed to the Metzias of Tachash, as soon as it was used out, as soon as the Mishkan the skin was used to the Mishkan, it went extinct. The animal doesn't exist anymore. And the reason is because Tachash, the Tachash animal was created in a way that his whole entity was only for the Mishkan. In order for the Mishkan to exist, you need to have the Tachash. So the second the Kavanah was Niskayim, the Tachash goes extinct. As opposed to Zav, the gold was created as a separate entity. To use that separate entity to serve the Eibishter. And therefore, even if it's not serving the Eibishter then, it's still a separate mitzvah. And that's a Chiddush of Baal Shem Tov through Magal, Einu Mavadi, that there is no separate mitzvah. There is no separate tzir besides the Eibishter. And therefore, a person's chayis, a person's life is in Terem mitzvahs. So that's all connecting the Baal Shem Tov to the concept of a birthday or being born, that there's no separation between the guf and the neshama, that the nefesh becomes one entity with the guf. So too, Terem mitzvahs and the person aren't two separate things, because the only true mitzvahs of the person is Einu Mavadi, is Terem mitzvahs. That's all the Chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe was mechadish a step further, and that's also brought out in the mashal of a ubar and a neilad. I thought I would explain the difference between an ubar and a neilad is that a person is born, he becomes a living being. His nefesh and guf are one mitzvahs. There's another difference between an ubar and a neilad. A ubar, a fetus, when he's in the mother's stomach, there's no significance to his evarim, to his limbs. There's no significance to his head, to his feet, to his eyes. He's getting a general chayes from his mother's stomach to the whole body. But the specific skechet, the specific limbs of the body, don't have any significance. He has eyes, but he can't see. He has ears, but he can't hear. When he's born, his keiches start functioning as separate entities. His eyes start becoming mitzvahs of the eye that they could see. His ears start becoming entity of something that is able to hear. Which means when a person is born, besides the chiddush that we said before, that the general chiddush, that he becomes a living being, but also his limbs start living. His keiches pratim start living. His eyes becomes an eye, and the ears become an ear that's able to work. Until every keich starts getting a chshivah, starts getting entity in its own right. And that was the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov brought a chayes klali. The Baal Shem Tov brought a general life, that in Megala how a yid's mitzias, a yid's entity is terem mitzvahs. But the way the Baal Shem Tov did that was through being Megala the emunah of a yid. Now the emunah of a yid, even though sometimes the Chassidus explains it's an eif and makif, the Baal Shem Tov's Megala the emunah of a yid, taka becomes his chayes, becomes his life, which means it penetrates every single part of his life. And he starts feeling a lakus, and the lakus becomes relevant to him in a way that Welt isn't a stira to lakus. The concept of Einu Mavadi becomes part of his mitzvahs, becomes his chayes. On the other hand, since it's an even of emunah, which means that there was no focus on each koyach grasping this mitzvah their own tchunis, so it stayed in a more general concept. The Alter Rebbe was magala each koyach mitzvah itself could deher Einu Mavadi, could deher that the mitzvahs of that koyach is only to serve the Eibishter. Through a yid understanding Einu Mavadi, he now understands that his seichel, that Einu Mavadi comes into his seichel, and therefore his seichel now starts understanding mitzat seichel gufe, that the only mitzvah of his seichel is anin le'ni v'esel l'sham sheskeni. And then from the seichel comes into midas, and it's pure that the midas feel that their whole mitzvah is only to have avenue to the Eibishter, until it comes into Maisa. Which means that Alter Rebbe was mechadish that not only the person in general could feel Einu Mavadi, not only that a person can have a chayes in terem mitzvahs, a chayes klali because he understands anin v'esel elo sham sheskeni, but that each keich mitzad atzmi could become a living thing. Each keich mitzad atzmi could have a chayes in terem mitzvahs mitzad his tchunis, and they understand that their whole mitzvahs is only anin v'esel elo sham sheskeni, because they Einu Mavadi. So that's the first half of the sikha. What comes after the first half of the sikha is that the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe were mechadish that a yid could have a chayes in terem mitzvahs. Chassidus brought a chayes into terem mitzvahs. But in last two sikhas we explained how the chayes that the Chassidus brought into terem mitzvahs was through being magala yid's neshama. That through being magala what a yid is. That yid is a chelik alakayim mal mamish. And that is begilui. So that's able to be Magal, Hayid Kavachas and Teremitis. In this Sikha, the word is a different word. The word is that Chassidus is Magal Inu Mavadi. Chassidus is Magal, the actors of the Eibishter, and there's no other entity besides the Eibishter. And therefore, through the Baal Shem Tov Magal is in a general concept. Magal how a Yid Metzias is. Ani learn Yivresi El Sham Sheskeni. A Yid doesn't have a separate Metzias because the whole world doesn't have a separate Metzias. The only true Metzias is Einu Mavadi. And that brings itself out through the Alter Rebbe into Chabad. That not only the general Yid should believe that, a Yid should believe that Ani Yivresi El Sham Sheskeni, but a Yid should hear that. And when a Yid hears that in Seichel, so Seichel understands Einu Mavadi. Seichel Gufa hears that the whole Metzias of Seichel is only in Sev the Eibishter. And so too when it comes down to Midas. Midas heard that the whole Metzias of Midas is only to have Av and Yira. So that's all the Chiddush, Chassidus was put in the person. But not mitzad the person, mitzad his neshama, mitzad Achas Hashem. The next half of the Sikha explains how this affects the world also. The Rebbe quotes the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov says, on the pasuk of Hayiki Sabay, Baal Shem Tov says that through a person, they're hearing a lakus, and what is given to him in Ma'adim Lamat and bringing it down into his seichel, that's going to help a person be mefarsim a lakus in the world. Says the Rebbe, what is the connection between a person that hearing a lakus and seichel and being mefarsim a lakus in the world? So the Rebbe starts explaining another aspect in the difference between a ubar and a neilad. Let's see it inside. Yishleim the Bir Bazeh. The chiluk zwischen a ubar und a neilad, nicht nur im Metzius legabe atzmei, nor eich uveika klape azulas. The difference between an ubar and a neilad is not only the way the ubar and the neilad exist, like you explained in Tona, that an ubar exists from his mother as opposed to a neilad exists in a separate entity. The Rebbe says that there's a difference klape chutz also. As an ubar, seinen Inyanev u'polesav la'atzmei. Und sie haben nicht kein Scheiches v'ashpot zu dem Elam shemachutz. A fetus, he doesn't have any effect on his surrounding. He doesn't have an effect on anything outside of him. Mashekim wenn der Kind wird geboren, ist jeder Pol b'metzius chutz mimenu. Animidig von dem Rega harishon shenelot, wenn sein Psycho hält sich machutz und sein Pol b'yadayim reglaim wird gesehen und gefühlt von anderen. When a person is born, the second he starts becoming a separate entity, he also starts having an effect on other people also. Whether it's that people can hear him, or see him, or feel the things that he does. That's one of the hagbalos of a person. A person can never not have a connection to chutz. The second a person is being, the second a person exists, he has to be able to be seen, even though no one's seeing him, but he's able to be seen, he can't be invisible, and is able to be felt. Und der Fahr ist als Hemmschicht zu der Leida von Aiden, das was sein Teremitzis und sein Chais ve Nefesh, der Rotzen Munutze, Shal Nefesh kommt herab in Eidus in Kelim, bringt das bei Mela ich der Pirsum Elikus, als wo kommt, der härter, als die Kavoni ist, im Farsam sein Elikus Beilam. And therefore, these two concepts have to do with each other. The first pattern Leida, which you said before, that he becomes a separate entity, which you explained in the Nimshal, that Chassidus means that a person through their hairs and in lein Yivresi El Sham Sheskeni, that his whole entity is only to serve the Eibishter. Through a person understanding that, he comes to the second aspect in Leida. The second aspect in Leida means that he has effect on other people. So too, through the hair and in lein Yivresi El Sham Sheskeni, that has an effect on the ways Mefarsim Lakus in the world. What's the pshat in them? Says the Rebbe, the Tam Deruf Beruchnis. That was Begashmis. Begashmis, we see that when a person exists, he starts having an effect on his surroundings. What's the Ruchnistic pshat in them? So says the Rebbe, the Tam Deruf Beruchnis, the Chiluk von a Sach, was wird belebt von a zweiter Sach, und a Chayes Atzmi, is the difference between something which is being revived by something, or something which is living by itself, is a Sach, was wird belebt von a zweiter, kennet mechayes an a andere. Something which is getting life from something isn't able to give life. Davke chay be'etzem ken von em sein chayes lahachis. Only something that has a true life, he exists on his own accord, his life is coming from himself, he has a kerch to give something else life. Like we see with the neshama and the guf, the neshama is mechayeh the guf, the neshama gives life to the guf. And through that, the guf itself, the body starts living. But the body is not able to transmit life onto something else. The body can't make something else live. Even though, when the neshama is in the guf, the body, aguf atzmei nasa chai, the body taka lives. The reason for that is because the chayis of the guf is chay lahachis. The chayes of the guf is a chayes that's coming from something. That's not able to transmit onto something else. The only way for chayes, for something to give life, is if he's ba'atzim living. He's living not because he's getting his chayes from something else. He's living because he's the source of life. He's chay ba'atzim. And if he's a source, he's something which is living on his own accord, he's able to transmit life. Es kommt zu a zweite Sach, nimmt es durch und macht das Leben. That something which is chay ba'atzim is able to make something else live. So that's all Bagashmis. Says the Rebbe, we bought that Likkutei Sichos mitzvah chayes atzmi. Is b'shas das wird die Mitzias von Aiden. Das ist sein Nefesh b'meile, wo Aid geht, Pilter, und nie ist mefeisem Likkutei Beila. If Torah mitzvahs were something separate than the person, the other Mevid, the person doing Torah mitzvahs, so there's no hechrich, there's no way that a person could transmit that into the world. A person could transmit that into the world. When can a person truly be mefaisim alakus in the world, and that everywhere he goes is there to be mefaisim alakus in the world, when he himself is chai b'atzim, when he himself is living with Torah mitzvahs? And the only way for a person to truly be living with Torah mitzvahs is in a way that Torah mitzvahs isn't only giving him life. He doesn't only came chayenu v'richamenu, that he gets his life from Torah mitzvahs, but a person that hears that his life is Torah mitzvahs. Because Eino Mavade is mechadish, that I need leinivrei si allo sham shaskenu. The person doesn't have an entity besides Torah mitzvahs. So when a person doesn't have an entity besides Torah mitzvahs, he's able to mefaisim alakus everywhere he goes, because he hears that that's his true being, that's who he is. That's the only thing he has. So that's the Chiddush of Chassidus in general. The Chassidus was Megala that a Yid is Alakus because of Eino Mavade, and therefore that has an effect how the Yid is pale in the world. It says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin that in that itself there's a difference between Chassidus HaKlalis and Chassidus Chabad. That's Siv Zayin, page 32 of the booklet. Afa Pes the Indian from Pirsim Alakus Be'ilam hat sich angeheben durch den Baal Shem Tov nach Ede dem Giluk von Teres Chassidus Chabad durch den Baal Rebbe. Even though the Baal Shem Tov already started with Chassidus to be mefaisim alakus in the world before Chassidus Chabad, kommt zu in dem Pirsim alakus wie das ist laachere Gilui Teres Chabad, as the Eires kommen up in Keilim. The Rebbe added that through Chabad you're able to have a different aspect in mefaisim alakus in the world. The Asbar Bazeh. Der Uftuf von dem Alter Rebbe mit Teres Chassidus ist nicht nur mit seinem Ausgeteiltkeit von Chabad Shal Adam von anderen Kirchs Nefesh. The reason why the Alter Rebbe brought the Chassidus Dafkin Chabad, Dafkin Seichel, isn't only because of the uniqueness that Seichel has over other Kirchs in the world, Kirchs Nefesh. Und der feierende Geas Teres Chassidus Elakus soll der Herren werden eichen Seichel Shadam. That which the Alter Rebbe focused on Chabad wasn't only because Seichel is the most important Kirch in the Nefesh, and therefore it's negea that Chassidus should reach Seichel. Why the Alter Rebbe put a focus on Seichel? The Pashas, the Alter Rebbe could have put a focus on Midis, on Maiseh. Now, the Rebbe put a focus on Seichel, which were Pashtos. The reason for that is, and the Stacker brought in a lot of Sichos of the Rebbe and the Rebbe, that Alter Rebbe was Mechadish, that Chassidus should be Neifen of Chabad. That Chassidus should be understood. In order for something to be Neifen Primi, it has to be through Seichel. That's all the uniqueness of what Seichel is. There's a much deeper aspect why the Alter Rebbe wanted the Chassidus should have to come into Seichel. Nor the Kavana is, Lasses le Yisparich dir b'tachtene. So the Herd werden as Eino Mavade. In Mitzias Eilam und Mitzad Eilam. The Kavan is that it should be dir b'tachtenim. In order to have dir b'tachtenim, it's not only good enough that Lakus should come into the world and be mefarsim Lakus in the world. Dir b'tachtenim means that the tachtin is a dir. The tachtin understands the Lakus. The tachtin has to understand that mitzad the tachtin, mitzad his mitzis, mitzad his entity, he's a dir for the Eibishter. How do you do that? Wie bald das Chalas and Mitzias. Was is Nivda Kaviyach von Alakus Seichel? Where does the Mitzias of a Tachten start? Where does the Mitzias of Kaviyach a separate entity start? Is Seichel in a person? Where can you pinpoint and say that a person's entity, a person's uniqueness start? Mitzad is Ratzin. Mitzad the things he wants. Ratzin is the Gila of the Nefesh. Ratzin is the expression of his Nefesh. It's the expression of himself, the higher than his personality, higher than his personal being. Where does a person start getting a personality? Where does a person start getting being a separate entity, his own uniqueness? That comes from Seichel. Like we see in Seichel, a person, even though Chassidus explains a lot of times that Seichel is the Keach a person has to go out of himself, is the Keach a person has to understand something separate than himself. On the other hand, a person's yeshus or a person's personality starts in Seichel. When a person has his own opinion, a person has his own way of understanding something. So even though he's understanding something which is higher than his mitzvahs, but on the other day he's understanding the way his Seichel is understanding. And his Seichel is the beginning of his mitzvahs. His Seichel is the beginning of his personality. And therefore, is l'chalaresh negeh to mazbe zayin anal and Seichel. Therefore, it's especially important to explain Achdus Hashem and to explain Enu Mevadeh that Seichel should understand it. Biz in Seichel Anushi, until the Seichel of the Nefesh Bahamas, the personal Seichel a person has, he should understand the Likkutei. Durch den was Seichel Adam der Herr unankert Achdus Hashem anal, and through that Seichel itself understands Achdus Hashem. Biz be'efen, as es wird kol mitziusei, from dem Seichel to verstehen in Likkutei. That Seichel understands Achdus Hashem. And through Seichel understanding Achdus Hashem, we said before, that's Peil, that he der Herr ani nivresi elo sham sheskeni. That he understands that the whole mitzvah of Seichel itself is only to understand the Likkutei. Because that's what Enu Mevadeh means. Kum das harap in a vashaves lovach and midas shebalev. That Seichel comes down into midas. But the pula b'shleimus in midas shebalev is in das kum dur Seichel ad. Because midas doesn't only mean that a person has emotions, a person has feelings that are separate than a Seichel. True midas means that the midas are functioned by Seichel. With the Rambam paskin azil halacha, v'heichi adarech la'avasa v'yirase b'shashi is beinin. Like Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, even though to love a person and to love the Eibishter comes as a feeling, is an emotion that comes from the heart. On the other hand, the Rambam paskin halacha that the way to have Avos Hashem is through his beinus, through Seichel. By days and the kersa atachtenim, through the eventually that has an effect on the kersa atachtenim of the person. Bizes wird der Herr Achdus Hashem in the ganze Welt of v'chol inyoni elam, until the whole world through a person himself that Herr Achdus Hashem and being mefarsim Likkutei in the whole world. That Peil did it betachtenim. Und der Rebbe sagt man, wie die Inni von lefarsim Likkutei be'elam kommt als Hemshach und Aprat in der Ufte von Chabad und Teres Chassidus Aklalis, weil lekachta v'samte batana malbo sein die Elis in Kelim kommt zu in dem חידוש. And that's why we see that the concept of Lafarsim Likkutei Le'elam, to Lafarsim Likkutei in the world, is like a direct continuation of Chassidus Chabad. Weil Nesev al Zeh, was wenn zet men, as das is a Rotzen Rutze von Etzem HaNefesh, was kommt up in Chabad, nicht an Inni, was sie verbunden mit seinem Metzias v'tainu. Besides the fact that when do we see, when do we determine that a person truly wants something, that a person truly is connected to something? We see that Dafke wenn mezet as the Mensch verbeugt auf der Avede mit sich seiner Skol in der Likkutei. Aber das war v'yira und geht mefarsim seinem Likkutei be'elam michutz heimenu. Besides the fact that being mefarsim Likkutei in the world is the true determination of when a person is holding by anin leinivresi elo sham sheskeni. When do we determine that a person the person understood anin leinivresi elo sham sheskeni when he's mefarsim Likkutei in the world, when he's not connecting to his own seichel. And he's giving up his own seichel, all to mefarsim Likkutei in the world, because that's who he is, that's his true being. Besides that, there's another nekuda. Is eich b'negeh der aveda gufa. It's negeh being mefarsim Likkutei in the world is negeh to the haveda itself. Why? Because kashem we see is negeh the pisim Likkutei mitzad the odom. So gotan ver mekol kirchis nafshi. As mefarsim zayin in Likkutei b'avana v'asoge, v'yidei midoysav ushar kirchis nafshi bis sukerach asir shalei. Legen Tfil mit Aiden, unklappen am Mezuzah bepisre bepesach beiser v'derze b'shar mitzvahs. Besides the fact that when a person mefarsim Likkutei in the world, it proves how much he's living with Torah mitzvahs. It proves with how much he that has ani lein beiser el sham sheskeni, like we just said before. Is that there is a negea is nutzen jeden mittel weifen if mefarsim in Likkutei leid dem matzav am yuchat shebechol zman v'chol makim. Was durch dem is me mevarim u'mayla ich dem machshir v'ini mesuyim in Welt lavidasi yisbarich. So besides the fact that it brings out his Aveda, it brings out how much connected Ani Lein Nivesha L'Sham Sheskeni, how much he there had Ani Lein Nivesha L'Sham Sheskeni. Besides that, it brings out Bepel how Veld is Ani Lein Nivesha L'Sham Sheskeni. That when a person brings out Mefarsim Likkutei in the world, and wherever he goes is Mefarsim Likkutei, he brings out the kavana of every single object and every single machshir mitzad atzmei. He's megan how that object itself was created for Ani Lein Nivesha L'Sham Sheskeni. So besides the fact that it's Megale, how he's living with Ani Lein Nivresi, and how much Enu Mevadeh penetrated his mitzvahs, but it also is Magala how every chefs in the world is le nivra lebra lechavedi. The Rebbe finishes up. This Likkutei was brought out through the חידוש Rebbe, because the חידוש Rebbe, besides doing Magala, very deep things in Chassidus, he also translated Chassidus and Eifen that everyone should be able to understand, and in told bringing down Torah mitzvahs into Bepel Mamish, Taras Mishpachim, putting a tefillin v'chulu. So what comes out from the Sikha is that we have two biurim so far in the חידוש of Chassidus, and the difference between the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus and the Baal Shem Tov's Chassidus. Like in last two Sichos, we focused on mainly the Chassidus had on the person. That the Chassidus brought a Chayes Klali in Torah mitzvahs to the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe was Mechadish a Chayes Prati in Torah mitzvahs. This Sikha over here focuses on how the change in the person, or the Chayes that was brought into the person through the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, besides being a change in the person, but it's a change in Achdus Hashem. It's Magala, a new level of Achdus Hashem. In order for the person to be able to change, in order for a person to have a Chayes in Torah mitzvahs, a Chayes Klali through the Baal Shem Tov, and a Chayes Prati through the Alter Rebbe, that is only through the herring Azeinu Muvadi. It's only through the herring Adebshas Doni Mitzias. And the more that a person has a Chayes, and the more the person changes their herring Chassidus, the more he's der herring, how Einu Mavade, and the more he's der herring, Anin Leves, and Elul Sham Shaskein. That was the first half. And the second half went a shlav further. That when is the true chayes, when is the true determination of a person's chayes? When he's mafayis malakus be'elam. When he's chay be'etzem, he's able to give chayes to ganz Welt, then he has to give chayes to ganz Welt. And that's in general. And the Alter Rebbe was mechadish, Chassidus Chabad. The reason why the Alter Rebbe brought the Chassidus into Chabad isn't only because, like we said before, to change the Chabad, the Seichel is the most important part of the person. But because in Mefaisim Lakus in the world, in Achdus Hashem, Seichel is the first separate entity that you have to derher Einu Mavade. And that's why the Alter Rebbe was Mechadish Davka Chassidus Chabad. So that's all the general Chiddush, that Chassidus Chabad is there to bring in Achdus Hashem. The next Sikha Dal in the booklet, brings out this concept even more, that in Achdus Hashem, there's two different levels, two different Eifanim of Achdus Hashem. It's a Sikha from Pashas Kisave, Chelik Lamates. And the Rebbe starts explaining two different Eifanim in how he recognizes everything he does comes from the Eibishter. The first Eifan is that a person knows that everything comes from the Eibishter, and therefore, Levushi Ateva don't have a significance. And just like in a nest, when a person sees a nest, he knows that reveals how Levushi Ateva aren't significant in any way, because the Eibishter runs the world. So too, regarding Teva, that he treats Levushi Ateva like a nest. The Levushi Ateva aren't Tevis Makam B'chala. Just like the man came from Shemayim, and that was his food. The Eibishter decided now that in order to have parnas, in order to have food, you have to have Levushi Ateva. So Levushi Ateva aren't Tevis Makam and Gansan. Then there's the second Eifan is that even though Levushi Ateva mitzad atzmam aren't Tevis Makam, and he's only doing Levushi Ateva because the Eibishter commanded him, but how gufa that the Eibishter commanded him to indulge in Teva means that now Teva gets a chshivus mitzad atzmai. Meaning instead of ignoring Teva and looking down on Teva, the fact that the Eibishter told him to indulge in Teva means that there's some chshivus in Teva mitzad atzma. And he starts recognizing the Eibishter through Teva. Teva reveals the Likkutei. And the Rebbe connects these two Eifanim to the חידוש of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. We start from Siv Zayin, page 41 in the booklet. Siv Zayin. Chai Elul, the Yom Hiledes Shnei Ameirus Agdelim, HaBaal Shem Tov Admor Zakin, Chol B'Rev Hashanim, B'Shavua, B'Shabbos Kedush Parsha Kisavi. Chai Elul usually falls on Parsha Kisavi, the week of Parsha Kisavi. V'Inyanim Shel Shnei Baalei Yom Hiledes, Masim Lebezei Fani Avedis Hashem Ana. The two Baalei Yom Hiledes, Baal Shem Tov and Alter Rebbe, they are connected to the two ways of Aveda we just mentioned before. Idea Baal Shem Tov v'Teres Chassidus HaKlalis, Idea Admor Zakin v'Teres Chassidus Chabad. Each one, the Baal Shem Tov had his חידוש and the Alter Rebbe had his חידוש. HaChidush in his Gala Idea Baal Shem Tov v'Teres Chassidus HaKlalis Teisvis Chayes Klali B'Kim Terem Mitzvahs. The main focus all about the main חידוש of Baal Shem Tov was a Chayes, a energy, enthusiasm in Terem Mitzvahs. V'lachein Echad Me'inyanim Shehudgeshu one of the main aspects that were emphasized by the Baal Shem Tov was Inyan HaEmunah. The concept of belief, the person, a Yid, believes in the Eibishter, but Tzadik b'Emunah Yichya. That belief, not only belief is something which is, person believes in the Eibishter, which is something separate than him, Nefem Makif, but that belief starts becoming primi. Not primi in a way that it comes into all his keiches, but primi means that he starts living with his emunah. Hare emunah zu he klalis subchinis makif. This emunah be'etzem is something which is makif. What does that mean? V'hainu the gam kshe'emuni be'efim kazeh she'ena b'chinis makif mamish. Even if the emunah isn't makif, even the emunah isn't something which is superficial. She'en lapul al adam. V'gam v'pamachtar terach manakaria. Even if you can. Even if the emunah isn't something which is completely superficial. Sometimes we say that emunah is completely superficial. Like it says in Gemara, that even though the God believes in the Eibishter, he calls out to the Eibishter to help him. Which means the emunah has no connection to his day-to-day b'pel mamash. So even if the emunah is not like that, the Baal Shem Tov is mechadish, then the emunah should give enthusiasm in Torah mitzvahs. And has an effect on day to day, b'pel mamash. Says the Rebbe, there's no emphasis on each person's keich mitzad atzma. All a person's keiches, his seichel, his midas, etc., are all there and all part of his general emunah in the Eibishter. Comes out to the Rebbe, Chassidus Chabad חידוש, comes out to the Rebbe's mechadish. As a continuation to the Baal Shem Tov's Chassidus. He wasn't B'chadash and Uinyan. He brought out the Baal Shem Tov's Chassidus. Not only that the Emunah should come into Chabad, which that's already a Chiddush, which Baal Shem Tov was a Madgish. That it becomes a separate thing. Meaning, Shekol Metzias Chabad Seichel Shebenafshei Hu Shemasig Elikus. The whole entity of Seichel, Chassidus Chabad is Megala, had the whole entity of Seichel. Why is Seichel there? Seichel's there to the Herav the Likus. And so to regarding Midas. That the point of Midas isn't only that a person's Emunah should reveal itself in Midas. That a person now should have a Chayis in Avedas Hashem also mitzad Midas. Prat Begilui Emunah. Ella, Shezeu Mitziusum Gufa Avos Hashem Midas Hashem. A person, Chassidus Chabad is there to bring out how the reason why a person has midas, the reason why a person has avon, the reason why a person has yira, the whole entity of avon yira is only to serve the Eibishter. If a person is only serving the Eibishter mitzad emunah is something be'etzim is makif. Emunah could never relate into all the keiches mitzad atzma. Why? Because emunah means, the whole concept of emunah means, like we explained in the first sikha, emunah means it's something which is given to you. Maminim b'nei maminim. A Yid inherits emunah. Emunah is not something that can resonate, that could come from you. And since it can never come from you, even if a person is going to have midas mitzad emunah, and a person is going to have seichel mitzad emunah, like we explained before, that a person could derher azenu mavadeh, but that's never going to be his inyan. It's never going to come from his keiches. He's never going to derher that the whole reason why he has seichel is only in order to have. Is only because of Einam Bavad. Because Emunah doesn't relate to Seichel on Seichel's level, on Seichel's terms. It said last time, the difference between Riyah and Shmiya. When a person sees something, the Yachas of the Riyah, the Yachas of the person who saw the object, and the object is that a person submits his keiches to the object. Even if he's going to feel the object that he saw, and he's going to understand the object that he saw, at the end of the day, the only reason why he saw it is because the thing revealed itself to him. Or he's coming to the world of the thing that he saw. And therefore, if he sees something that doesn't make sense, he can't deny it because he saw it. So even though the thing that he saw resonates in the person, and Eined Nasadain, when a person sees something, it becomes something which is completely true by him. He can't deny it. On the other hand, can you say that his keiches relate to what he saw on their level? No, because it's not coming from them. They could agree to it. His seichel could agree to what he saw, and immediately he could feel something mitzad since that he saw it. He has to agree to it, but it's not something that he earned. And that's the main focus of the first Sichos. Shmiya, when a person understands something, When a person understands something, he's not coming into the world of the thing he's trying to understand. He's trying to bring the thing he understands into his world. If a person is going to have to understand a picture, he's not going to be able to just see it. He's going to have to explain every single detail of the picture. He's going to have to form the picture based on the details that he understands. If you want to explain to someone what you saw, you can't show him the picture. You have to explain to him the picture. To explain to the picture means you're going to have to bring out every single detail of the picture into that person's understanding. And then the person can form the picture. Because that's how seichel works. So in order for seichel to understand that the reason why there isn't mitzias of seichel is only because of anila nivresa el sham sheskeni, seichel has to start understanding enu mavade on his terms. And on seichel's terms means he understands mitzad Chabad. Not because he's inspired and not because he's drawn mitzad emunah to it, but because seichel wants to understand enu mavade. And if seichel mitzad that understands enu mavade, then seichel could derher that mitzad seichel gufa, seichel is anila nivresa. The reason why he exists is only mitzad anila nivresa el sham sheskeni. And now the Rebbe takes this concept and connects it to Achdus Hashem. Says the Rebbe, "V'gam zehu behesem legili Achdus Hashem, k'fishin esgalsa yidei Abba Shem Tov, v'k'fishin nimshchav nesgal yidei Admor Zaken." These two ways of serving the Eibishter, of person understanding his general mitzias is anin le'nivresa l'sham sheskeni, and then that the seichel gufa understanding anin le'nivresa l'sham sheskeni. These are two ways in Achdus Hashem. Yidei Abba Shem Tov nisgala ha'inyan de'einu mavadi. The Baal Shem Tov was megala the concept of einu mavadi. What does einu mavadi mean? She'ein shu mitzius zulasi yisbarich. There's no other entity besides the Eibishter. That was in Haskalah. V'chein nigish gam avedas Hashem. And so to Naveda, the Baal Shem Tov was mechadash, she'ein tfisis makam lavidase ela kol kulei gilui nekudas ha'emunah shebenafshei sheyeshnu b'kolachem yisod mishad nishmasei shelamaylu mitzius adam. Which is, we focus on last sikha. Baal Shem Tov was mechadash einu mavadi in Aveda also. That there's no tefisas makam to a person's Aveda as a separate mitzvahs. A person doesn't have keim chayenu v'yichamenu, that a person's life is taken in mitzvahs. Mitzvah is given to him. A person's mitzvahs doesn't start b'chlal. And therefore, his Aveda in taken mitzvahs is higher than his mitzvahs. So that was Baal Shem Tov's חידוש. The Admor Zaken is galein de Achdus Hashem gam k'meshu mitzad ha'elam. The Alter Rebbe was mechadash nuvad in Achdus Hashem mitzad the world that has Achdus Hashem. What does that mean? Not only that there is no other separate mitzvahs besides the Eibishter, and therefore the world isn't a stira to the Eibishter, a stira to the Achdus of the Eibishter, because the world isn't a mitzvahs. Alayidei ha'elam mizgala ha'imik da Hashem echad shemitzius ha'elam miyuchedes be'yizbarich u'kumavur baruch b'shirich l'mura zakin. The Alter Rebbe is a step further. Not only that the Eibishter is the only mitzvahs, and therefore the world isn't a mitzvahs. You can have it, the world isn't a mitzvahs, but it doesn't bring out the Achdus of the Eibishter. The Alter Rebbe is mechadish, and not only the world isn't a stira to Likkutei, but the world brings out the Achdus of the Eibishter. Through the world, you see the Achdus of the Eibishter even more. And like we see this on Vedas Adam, Mechina Gam Vedas Adam, Sheledak Shekol Kechesh Shleihem Behesem L'Likkutei Emunah B'Hashem Echad. Not only that all his keches are in sync with his emunah, and the zel kol mitzius haseichel shebei. This is what seichel is. Sheseichel atzmi mitzad inyoni makish umargish achdus Hashem mitzad mitzius gufa. That seichel understands that the mitzius of seichel itself is ki mitzius haseichel gufa in a davar nifn mimenu yisbarich. That the mitzius of Welt and the mitzius of seichel itself understands that seichel is there for the Eibishter. Seichel brings out the Achdus of the Eibishter. That the only reason why a person has Seichel is to understand the Zainul Mavadi. So it's not only that Seichel doesn't contradict the concept of Einul Mavadi, or Seichel agrees to the concept of Einul Mavadi. Seichel brings out Einul Mavadi. Seichel understands how Seichel itself is only there to bring out Einul Mavadi. And with Davar Zeh, Bodafke the Giyev Aveda Sa'adam Aveda B'kech Atzman Dafke. This concept that Welt shouldn't only not contradict the Likkutei, but Welt should bring out a Likkutei, that comes to Aveda B'kech Atzmei. Lahavin or lahasig Achdus Hashem gam b'sichlei, that person has to understand and grasp Achdus Hashem in his seichel. V'ad l'seichel shebenefesh b'hamis. Until the seichel nefesh b'hamis understands, v'ayidei izbeinos harei zonim shabam mideisav, and that it comes down in his midas. Avos Hashem, Vedas Hashem. B'efen she'aba v'yira shayachiz l'mitzias hamidis shebalev. the Ava V'yira Noni is a spiritual union, but it relates to is the Ava and to his midas of nefesh b'hamis. That it has that every single koach, the only reason why it's there is only to the muhusa, the entity of that koach is there is for likus. They put man esach shal bashem the chutza shenase bikra de amshachas bechabad shebenafshe shebeteres Chassidus Chabad Mendel lemidus v'liba paling l'chol shaifin kasim radav da makom shichotech u'memamshe through the mayonos of Hashem, the coming into Chassidus Chabad and eventually coming to the whole world, like we explained in the last sikha. Then you have a kasim radav makom shichot. So what comes out from this sikha is the last sikha we explained in general that the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe were there to bring out the concept of Achdus Hashem. So Baal Shem Tov brought Achdus Hashem into the general body, as opposed to the Alter Rebbe started Achdus Hashem to each Kersh understand Achdus Hashem. In this Sikha, we're explaining there's two different levels in Achdus Hashem. You have Achdus Hashem in a way that the Eibishter is the only Mitzias, and the world agrees to that. That the world is in a state to that. But then you have Achdus Hashem, that the world itself is Megala Achdus Hashem, which in Chassidus and B'derech Kal explains that you have Achdus M'mayla L'mata and Achdus M'mata L'mayla. Achdus M'mata L'mayla means that the world agrees to Likus, that the world is batal to Likus. And mitzad of the world being batal to Likus, a person looks down on the world. The world isn't Tevis Makam B'chlal. There's no chivus to Levush HaTepa. Then you have Achdus M'mayla L'mata. Achdus M'mayla L'mata means the way a Likus expresses itself in the world. Elikus is mispashet in the world. That Elikus is mispashet into every single being of the world. That mitzias, the mitzias of the world, Gufe expresses Elikus. On Lashon of the Friedrich Rebbe in the Likkutei Sichos, that Avraham Avinu's Megala is Baruch Hu is alt, and not is Baruch Hu is alt means that nothing is makim. The world, the Eibush is everything. As opposed to alt is means that the world itself is Megala Elikus. Not only that the world agrees to Elikus, but the world itself is Megala how it itself is Elikus. Which in our context means that the Seichel Gufe understands as Einu Mavade, and therefore Seichel understands that the whole reason why a person has Seichel is only there to understand Einu Mavade. And in the Nivei Shel Hashem Sheskein.